Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu salam ala Rasulillah. So we continue chapter 6. We want to derive the transfer function for this system. Okay, this is the system given. We want to derive the transfer function. Okay, now what's given in this system? We have a multi-loop. We have two loops, in fact. Okay, two loops. He said the input in this problem, the input is EI. This is my input. Okay. This is my input. Let me. He said the input. Okay. Input is the voltage N. This is the input. And the output is the voltage across C2. This is the output, okay? This is the input. Okay. Find the transfer function, E out over E in. Now, what's the difference between this example and the previous example? Here we have two loops. In the previous example, we have one loop. So two loops means what? You will have two equations of motions, okay? All right. And then you need one more equation describing what's E out. This is the main difference. So just more equations of motions, okay? Now two loops, just like what in mechanical system? Like 2 degrees of freedom in mechanical system. Same thing, okay? Just more equations, more work. That's all. All right? So how are you going to solve this problem? This is the short answer showing you on the slide. For loop number 1, this is the equation of motion after taking the Laplace transform and assuming zero initial condition. For loop number 2, this is the equation of motion after taking the Laplace transform, assuming zero initial condition. And you need to define one equation describing what's E out. Then you will have 3 equations, okay? And you will have 5 functions or 5 variables. What are they? EI and E out, these are 2. I1 and I2, okay? These are 4, sorry. You need 4 equations, 4 variables. You have 4 variables. EI, E out, I1 and I2, okay? And you have 3 equations. So you need to eliminate I1 and I2 clearly in order to find the ratio E out over EI. And this is going to be your transfer function. So this is the short answer. Okay. Now for practicing, let's do it together. Let's do it together, okay? Let's take for loop number 1. I'm going to do it as an example to refresh your memory how to find the equation of motion. Loop number 1. What's the equation of motion? You start with your source, EI minus the voltage across R1, which is R1. You need to define, by the way, current here and current here, same direction. So you're going to call this I1 and this is I2. Just like a degree of freedom in mechanical system, okay? You need to define what's the degree of freedom. So this is going to be R1, I1, minus the voltage across C1, which is 1 over C1 integral I1 minus I2 dt, because we have another current on the other side, equal to 0. So this is equation number 1. For loop number 2, what's the equation of motion loop number 2? Now in loop number 2, all the elements are passive, so all of them are negative. There is no voltage. Okay, so we're going to start with C1, negative, because it's passive element, 1 over C1 integral I2 minus I1 dt minus R2 I2 minus the voltage across C2, which is 1 over C2 integral I2 dt equal to 0. And this is equation number 2. See, we have two equations. We need one more equation describing what's the voltage, because we need to define what's the voltage out, okay? Because we're going to use it for the transfer function. And he said what? E out is what? He said E out 1 over C2, the voltage across C2, I2 dt, and this is equation number 3. Okay? Now we have three equations, 1, 2, 3. We're going to take Laplace transform. Okay? So take Laplace transform, assuming 0 initial conditions. So this is going to be your from 1. This is what you're going to get. Take Laplace. Let me do it on the other slide. From 1. So you need, let me remind you what we are doing. We want to take Laplace transform, assuming 0 initial conditions. Okay, just like we did in chapter 4. Okay, so from 1, it's going to be EI R1 I1, EI minus R1 I1 minus 1 over C1, 1 over C1, 1 over S also, I1 minus I2 equal to 0. This is equation number 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Because we end up with 3, yes, 4. I1 minus I2. For loop number 2 or equation number 2, from equation number 2, what do we have? 1 over C1 minus, don't forget, 1 over C1 S I2 minus I1. Okay, minus R2 I2 minus 1 over C2 S I2 equal to 0. Equation number 5. Last equation number 3. From 3, E out equal to 1 over C2 S I2. And this is the equation number 6. Now what you're going to do, how many algebraic equations? We have 3 algebraic equations. How many variables or functions? We have 4. What are they? EI and E out, 2. I1 and I2, 4. Okay? So we need to eliminate I1 and I2 and solve for E out over EI, the ratio. Okay? So how are you going to do this? We can start from 6. From 6, solve for I2. Okay? Solve for I2. I2 will be what? It will be C2 S E out. Okay? C2 S E out. And call this number 7. Now, substitute 7. Let me use another slide. Or we have a space here. We're going to substitute. Let me tell you what I'm going to do next. I'm going to substitute 7 and 5 and 4. Why? To eliminate I2. Then you're left only with I1. Solve for I1 from one equation and substitute it to the other. And then the transfer function will be ready. This is the story, okay, what we are doing. So substitute 7 substitute 7 in which equation? 4 and 5. 4 and 5. So from 4, after substitution, what you will get? EI R1 I1 minus 1 over C1 S I1 minus I2. EI minus R1 I1 minus what? 1 over C1S 1 over C1S I1 minus I2, which is what I2? C2 SE out equal to 0, right? Hope we get it correctly. Yes. All right. Okay. Before we substitute in 5, or you want to substitute in 5? Before we substitute in 5, let's solve for I1 from here. Okay. So we simplify it. Let's simplify it before we jump to the equation 5. I'm going to solve for I1 from here. This is going to be how much? It's going to be EI on one side. Let's leave EI on one side. And E out also we can leave it. It's going to be plus C2 over C1. C1. C2 over C1. Okay, S will cancel with S, and you're left with E out. Okay, this is for this term. And take everything to the other side. This is going to be R1 and minus plus R1 plus 1 over C1S. C1S, right? Times the current I1. Yes? I hope this is correct. R1, yes, 1 over C1S, I1, yes. Now solve for I1. I1 will be how much? It will be EI plus C2 over C1, E out, okay, over R1 over R1 plus 1 over C1S. Okay, that's all. And let's call this a new equation, number 8. Okay, now from 5, let's go back to 5. We will do the same thing, substitute 7 and 5. So it's going to be minus 1 over C1S I2 minus 1 over C1S, right? Is it C1? Yes, I2. What is I2? I2, it is what? I2 is C2S E out. To S E out. C2S E out. C2S minus I1. Okay. All right. Minus I1 minus R2 I2 minus R2 I2, which is again, what is I2? It is C2 S E out. To S E out. We still have one term. Minus 1 over C2S minus 1 over C2S I2. What is I2 again? Can you remember? C2S E out. C2S E out equal to 0, right? Yes. Now this C2 will cancel with this one, and this S will cancel with this. Okay, let me solve for I1. Let me solve for I1 because we're going to use it in equation number 8. Let me solve for I1. So let me simplify this first. How are we going to simplify this? We can solve for I1 from here and take E out to the other side. Take E out to the other side. So from here we have minus plus 1 over C1 1 over C1S, okay, multiply by I1. This is the only term for I1. And the rest, take it to the other side, negative, it's going to be positive. C2S over C1S, it's going to be C2 over C1, right? E out. Plus R2, C2, S, E out, plus the last term, this one, which is how much? 1, right? Plus 1. All multiplied by E out. Okay, now just solve for I1. Do we need, let me use another slide. One more. Maybe we need more, just in case. So let me go back. Continue, solve for I1. I1 will be how much? It will be all this multiplied by C1S. So I1 will be how much? C1S multiplied by C2 over C1 plus R2 C2 over C1 plus R2 C2S plus 1 times E out, right? Yes, C1S, let me double check. C1S C2 over C1 R2 C2 plus 1, yes. Simplify. This will be C2. Let me start with the this one, C1 C2 R2 or R2 C2 S square plus this one C2 S plus the last one C1 S. Yeah, right? Yeah, I hope so. Okay, C1 C2 S, all right, times multiply E out. Okay, you can also simplify this more by R2 C1 C2 S square plus C1 plus C2 S times E out. This is I1. Let's call this equation, where did we reach? 9. This one 9. All you have to do, substitute 9 in 8 and you will be done. Okay, so just equate 9 to 8. So from 8, all I'm gonna do, I'm gonna rewrite this again. We have to be patient. C1 C2 S square plus C1 plus C2 S multiply by E out equal to, let me write it from here because we need the space, EI over, or EI plus C2 over C1, EI plus how much? C2 over C1 E out, C2 over C1 E out, R1 plus 1 over C1S, R1 plus 1 over C1S. Alright, just derive. E out over E I. So how are you going to derive this? How are you going to simplify this? Collect all the variables of E out together one side and E out on the other side. Okay, so how are you going to do this? You will multiply this term by E out first. You need to multiply. So let me write it on the other. This is how much is this? R1, 1 over C1S. R1, 1 over C1S multiply by all this term. R2, C1, C2. R2, C1, C2, S square, plus C1, C2, plus C1, plus or yes. Is it correct? C1 plus C2, yes. S, okay. S times E out times E out. Okay, so this one I'm going to use the other one, this one. Okay, equal to EI plus C2 over C1. C2 over C1 E out. Correct? Yes. Okay. So you can distribute the terms because this is going to simplify your transfer function. You will get it easily after this step. So I'm going to multiply, distribute the terms, all this one. So start with S square. So this is going to be R1, R1, R2, C1, C2, S square. Okay, plus C1 plus C2 times R1 S plus, if you multiply this one will be how much? It's going to be R2 C, which one will cancel? C1, so you're left with C2 S, okay, plus the last one, this one, C1 plus C2 divided by C1. S will cancel with S. Okay. This is all multiplied by E out. Okay. This is correct? Yes. S will cancel with S. C1 divided by C2. Yes. Equal to EI plus C2 over C1 E out. Okay. So the transfer function we're looking for, how much? Collect E out with the other E out and divide. So the transfer function, which is E out over EI, will be what? After you collect this one with the E out, okay, so it is going to be 1 over all this R1, R2, C1, C2, S square plus R1, C1 plus C2, S plus R2, C2, S plus C1 plus C2 C1 plus C2 over C1. Yes. And one more term here, don't forget about it, minus C2 over C1, right? I hope this is correct. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to clearly C2 over C2, this one, will cancel with what? With this one, right? C2 over C1 will cancel with plus C2 over C1, right? Right? And you're left with this equation. So I'm gonna rearrange it in the next slide. Let me open one last slide, I promise. Then this will cancel with this, and you're left with what? Let me write it again here. Transfer function we're looking for. One over R1, R2, C1, C2 S squared. R1, R2, okay. R1, R2, C1, C2 S squared plus. Let me collect all the coefficient of S together. We have R1, C1, R2, R1, C2, R2, C2. Okay, these three terms I'm gonna R1, C1, R1, C2. R1, C1 plus R1, C2 plus the last one what? R2, C2. Multiply by S plus, what's the last term? C1 over C1, which is 1. Which is 1. And this is my transfer function. Let me check the solution. R1, R2, C1, C2. This is correct. R1, C1, R1, C2, R2, C2, plus 1. R1, let me check. R1 and R1. So this is the same. It's correct. Okay. Thank you. And what we gonna do next, okay? The complex impedance, okay? We will talk about the complex impedance.